The Forgotten Ones. I used to live in a city where the buildings scraped the sky and the streets were constantly thrumming with life. At first, I thought I'd like the solitude of a house away from the city's pulse. I wanted peace, a place to escape the noise. The apartment I had before was cramped and noisy. I wanted more space, but I wasn't looking for the kind of space the house offered. The house was old, nestled on the edge of town, away from the usual hustle and bustle. It had this peculiar charm, an eerie kind of allure. When Mrs. Trask, the landlord, handed me the keys, I should have known something wasn't right. She didn't smile when she gave them to me. "It's all yours," she said, her voice thick with something I couldn't quite place. She told me to be careful about the basement, and that was it. No other instructions, no small talk. But when I saw the price, I couldn't resist. So I signed the lease without asking any further questions. What I didn't know then was that I had just made the worst mistake of my life. The first week was fine. I unpacked my things and spent my evenings exploring the rooms, trying to find some comfort in the cold emptiness. The floors were covered in dust, the walls worn with age. The house was alive in its own way, groaning and creaking with every change in the air, as though it were settling deeper into itself, but nothing unusual. Just the normal quirks of an old home, the kind of place that makes you feel like you're living with the echoes of forgotten memories. But then, the flickering began. It was subtle at first. I'd be sitting in the living room, reading or scrolling through my phone, and the lights would dim just slightly. Then they'd flicker back to full brightness, as though nothing had happened. I thought it was a problem with the wiring, nothing more. But it wasn't just the lights. The air in the house started to feel different, heavier, colder. There was a persistent chill that wouldn't go away, no matter how high I turned up the heat. I didn't want to admit it, but it made me uneasy. I'd lay in bed at night, wide awake, listening to the creaks and sighs of the house. I told myself I was just tired, stressed. It was a new place, and moving was always unsettling. But that night, when the shadows in my room began to stretch unnaturally, I felt a wave of something cold and suffocating wash over me. It wasn't just the house settling. Something was wrong. The whispers started the next night. At first, I thought it was the wind. The house had old windows, and I figured the air was just finding its way through the cracks. But the whispers came again, low, muffled, just on the edge of hearing, like someone was speaking just beyond the threshold of comprehension. "Help me." The voice was faint but insistent, like a child calling out in the dark. I sat up, my heart racing in my chest, but there was no one. The room was empty. The house was still, save for the slight flicker of the overhead light. I shook my head, trying to calm myself. I was just tired. Stress had a way of making my mind play tricks on me. The next day, I thought I was imagining it, but it happened again. The whispering. And this time, it was louder, clearer. "Come down." The voice sounded familiar. It sounded like me. I stood in the middle of my living room, frozen, heart pounding. It wasn't just a whisper now. It was a voice, soft, like a lullaby, but filled with an urgency I couldn't ignore. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, maybe an old creaky pipe, but deep down, I knew it was something else, something that was waiting for me. That night, the voice called again. "Come downstairs." I felt an unfamiliar pull, an almost irresistible compulsion. Without thinking, I rose from the bed and moved toward the door. My steps were heavy, my mind spinning with confusion and fear, but my body was moving without my permission. The shadows seemed to reach out to me as I walked down the hallway, my every step amplifying the creaks of the old wood. When I reached the stairs, my feet paused at the top, my gaze flickering downward. It was darker than usual. The house felt colder, like the temperature had dropped by several degrees in mere seconds. The whispering had stopped, replaced by a deep, unsettling hum that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. I stood there, paralyzed. I couldn't understand why, but I knew I had to go down. I had no choice. The basement door loomed at the bottom of the stairs. I had never thought about it before. Mrs. Trask had been so adamant about staying away from the basement. I had figured it was just some old storage space, maybe a place for cleaning supplies or junk. But as I stood at the foot of the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something far more significant than that. It felt like it was waiting for me, calling me. I reached for the handle. The door was cold in my hand, and when it creaked open, the smell hit me, a damp, musty stench, like rot. I stepped inside. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The dim light from the hallway barely touched the edges of the space. The basement was vast, empty, save for one thing in the center of the room, a large mirror. Its surface was cracked, the edges warped and tarnished with age. The frame was ornate, covered in a layer of dust, and it stood like a monument to something forgotten. But there was something about it that made my blood run cold. Something about the way the glass seemed to draw me in, almost alive. I moved closer, my pulse quickening, but I couldn't stop. I had to look. I had to see. As I gazed into the mirror, my reflection stared back at me. But something was wrong. My image was slightly distorted, as though the mirror itself was distorting my appearance. My eyes were too wide, too hollow. My face was pale, gaunt, and my lips curled into a thin, unsettling smile. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the glass. It was cold, so cold it felt like it was sucking the warmth out of me. And then, the voice came again. "You shouldn't have come." It wasn't just the whisper anymore. The voice was louder, more insistent, like a warning. The reflection in the mirror began to shift, as though it were a separate entity, alive. The figure in the glass moved with me, mimicking my every gesture, but there was something wrong about it. The smile on its face grew wider, more twisted. It was me, but it wasn't me. And then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Behind the figure, no, inside it, was a shape, a shadow, a person. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and they smiled too. Their grin stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, broken teeth. The voice came again, louder, almost deafening. "You shouldn't have come. You belong to us now." I recoiled, my breath caught in my throat. But the figure in the mirror, I stepped forward, closer to the glass, reaching for me. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was something else entirely. The space between the glass and the world around me began to warp, stretch, twist. I ran. I stumbled back through the hallway, the house groaning around me, the walls closing in. The whispers followed, rising louder and louder, until they drowned out every other sound. I bolted up the stairs, my heart thudding in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could hear were the words that followed me everywhere. Come back. Part 2. The Forgotten Ones. It's been years since I left that house. I moved far away, as far as I could, but the whispers didn't stop. They follow me in the dark, in the silence, always just out of reach. I can hear them when I'm alone. Soft, faint, but always there. The house wasn't just haunted. It wasn't just a place with ghosts and whispers. It was alive. It lived off of me, fed off of my fear, my confusion. And every time I looked into a mirror, I saw her. The thing that looked like me, but her eyes were hollow. Her smile, twisted. And I knew that it was only a matter of time before I returned. Because that's the way the house works. It waits for you to forget. It waits for you to come back. And when you do, it will take you forever. Thank you for reading The Forgotten Ones. I hope this story brought chills and captivated your imagination. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to NoSleep Tales on YouTube for more spine-tingling narratives. Share your thoughts and let me know what themes or elements you'd like to see in future stories.